When you pick up a document that has always been yours and realize it has signatures you didn't give, the first thing that comes to mind is that you're seeing things wrong. But you're not. And when it happens 2 or 3 times, you understand one thing. There are people close to you making plans without you. I could have confronted him on the first day, but I didn't, because I already knew what was happening. And I also knew that those who act hastily act without thinking. So I chose to wait. And observe every move. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I've spent the last 32 years building something solid. A life, a family, an estate that didn't appear out of nowhere. I worked Monday through Saturday for decades. I gave up travel, rest, things that other men my age did while they were still healthy. I chose to build, and I built well. I have 2 children, a son and a daughter, both in their 30s, raised comfortably, college paid for, cars when they needed them, help when they got married. My wife has always been by my side, or at least that's what I believed until 6 months ago. We had a peaceful routine, family dinners on Sundays, conversations about grandchildren who haven't arrived yet, retirement plans that I was starting to draw up. I've always been a man who likes to keep things organized, documents in folders, contracts saved, copies of everything. Not out of distrust, but because I've learned that life demands clarity. So when I started noticing small changes, I didn't think I was imagining things, I just kept quiet. First, it was a power of attorney. I had given my wife a simple power of attorney years ago just to make some signatures easier when I traveled for work. A common thing. But when I went to review some household papers, I saw that I had a new power of attorney, more comprehensive, with powers that I didn't remember giving. The signature was mine, but I didn't remember signing it. I could have asked, but I didn't. I just kept the information to myself. Then there was a conversation I overheard. My son was talking to my daughter in the kitchen while I was in the office. They didn't know I was home. They were speaking quietly, but I heard. Something about resolving this before he notices, about making sure everything is all right, about Mom is already taking care of it. I could have gone into the kitchen. I could have asked what they were talking about, but I didn't. I just stayed where I was, listening, and registering every word in my memory. In the following days, I started paying more attention, small details that I had previously overlooked, family gatherings that took place when I wasn't there, exchanged glances, conversations that stopped when I entered the room. My wife spending more time on the computer, always closing the screen when I approached. Nothing too obvious. Nothing that would justify a confrontation, but enough for me to understand that something was being done behind my back, and that this thing involved me. I had 2 choices. I could have exploded, demanded explanations, made a scene, or I could have stayed quiet, observed, understood the whole play before making any move. I chose the second option, because men my age have already learned that reacting quickly is not the same as reacting well. Look, I know you're listening to me, and if this story resonates with you, if you've also been through something similar, or know someone who has, I want to ask you something. Subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment saying where you're listening to this from. It can be from your home, from work, wherever, because these stories aren't just mine. They belong to all of us who one day chose to observe before reacting. And I want to know that you're here with me. I realized it early. That's important for you to understand. It wasn't after weeks or months. It was early. But realizing early doesn't mean you have to act early. Sometimes realizing early means you have time to plan better. I started doing small tests, nothing dramatic, just to confirm what I already suspected. I deliberately left some documents out of place, papers that I knew no one should be touching. And the next day, they were in a different place. Someone had looked. Someone was looking for something. I asked sporadic questions during dinner, things like, has anyone seen that blue folder I left at the office? Or, do you know if any mail arrived from the bank this week? And I observed their reactions. My wife looked away. My son changed the subject too quickly. My daughter remained silent. Everything is small. Everything is subtle. But when you've lived with the same people for decades, You know the patterns. And when the patterns change, you know there's a reason. I started checking my documents more carefully, and that's when I noticed more things. There was a change in the will that I hadn't authorized. Small, but significant. It altered how certain assets would be divided, not the way I had left it registered. There were also transactions in a joint account that my wife and I had, transfers to an account I didn't recognize. Not very large amounts, but constant. Someone was diverting money little by little, in a planned way. I stopped explaining myself, because explaining to someone who's deceiving you only gives them more information to protect themselves. So when my wife asked if I'd been to the bank recently, I just said yes. When my son asked if I was thinking of changing anything in my will, I just said I was thinking about several things. Vague answers, nothing that revealed what I already knew. They thought I didn't understand. And that was the advantage I needed. Because when people think you don't know what's going on, they get careless. They make mistakes, they leave traces. And that's exactly what started to happen. My wife started going out more, always with good excuses, meetings with friends, doctor's appointments, commitments. She never mentioned before. But I knew she was going somewhere specific, because she always came back at the same time, always with the same expression, the expression of someone taking care of something important. My children started coming to my house more often, always with casual questions about my health, about how I was feeling, if I was forgetting things, if I was having trouble making decisions. Questions that seemed like concern, but that I knew had another purpose. They were building a narrative, the narrative that I was losing the ability to manage my own life. And I let them, because the more they believed it, the more confident they became, and the more mistakes they made. There's something about silence that most people don't understand. Silence is not weakness, silence is a choice, and when you choose silence, you are choosing to observe without interfering. You are choosing to let people reveal who they really are. I started documenting everything, every strange conversation, every altered document, every financial transaction that didn't make sense. But I did it discreetly. I took photos with my cell phone. I noted dates and times. I kept copies of everything in places that no one else knew existed, because I already knew where this was going. I didn't know exactly when, but I knew there would come a point where they would take a bigger step, a step that couldn't be undone. And when that happened, I would need proof. My daughter started talking about nursing homes, always casually, as if it were just a conversation. He said he knew people who had placed their parents in very good places, comfortable, with nurses, activities, security, that it was a way to ensure the person received proper care. I just listened and nodded in agreement, as if I were considering the idea. My son started talking about full powers of attorney, about how important it was that someone in the family could make decisions if I became incapacitated, that it was just a safeguard, a way to ensure things kept running. I was just listening too, and I said it made sense. My wife started talking about selling some properties. She said it was better to simplify things, that managing everything was getting complicated, that we could use the money to travel, to enjoy life. And I once again just listened and agreed that it was something to think about, because I had already understood the whole plan. They wanted to make me seem incapable. They wanted to take control of my assets. They wanted to exclude me from decisions, and in the end they wanted me to stay in a place where I couldn't interfere while they divided everything up however they saw fit. It wasn't about care, it was about control and about money. I could have exploded at that moment. I could have thrown everything in their faces, but I didn't, because I knew that if I confronted them early, they would deny it. They would say I was misinterpreting things. They would make me look paranoid. And maybe they would even use it as proof that I was really losing my mind. So I remained quiet, and I continued observing. Have you ever noticed how confident people become when they think they're in control? They start acting more openly, more carelessly, because they believe no one is paying attention. That's exactly what happened. The more I pretended not to understand, the further they progressed. And the further they progressed, the more mistakes they made. My wife started signing documents on her own. Using that broad power of attorney that I didn't remember giving her, she transferred the deed to a smaller property to her children's names, without consulting me, without informing me. When I found out, I didn't say anything. I just took a picture of the document and kept it. My son went to the bank and tried to access information about investments that were in my name. The manager called me to confirm. It was protocol. I said everything was fine, that my son could access the information. And I noted the date and time. My daughter started researching nursing homes in the area. I found out because she left the page open on the home computer. It wasn't an accident. It was because she was already so confident that she didn't even bother to hide it anymore. And I remained silent. I continued pretending I didn't see, that I didn't understand, that I was distracted by other things, because each of their actions was giving me more ammunition. Every step they took was further proof of what was really happening. There was a family dinner where I tested the water. I asked directly, "Are you guys plotting something?" And I laughed, as if it were a joke. My wife laughed too. She said I was getting suspicious. My children shook their heads, saying I was seeing things where there weren't any, that they were just trying to help, that I needed to relax. And I believed it, or at least I pretended to believe it, because that's what they needed to think. The truth is, I was starting to see the bigger picture. It wasn't just about inheritance, it was about getting me out of the way while I was still alive. It was about taking complete control. And maybe deep down, it was about something even worse, about putting me in a place where I couldn't question, where I couldn't react. I stopped trying to explain myself, because I had already understood that it was pointless. They had already decided what they wanted to do, and nothing I said was going to change that. So I decided to let them go ahead, to let them feel safe, to let them make the ultimate mistake. There's a moment in every plan where people become so confident that they make the fatal mistake. They think they've already won, that there's no turning back. And it's at that moment that they completely let their guard down. I had been waiting for this moment, and it was getting closer. My wife scheduled a meeting with a lawyer. She didn't tell me, but I found out because I received a call from the office confirming if I would attend. I said yes, and I went. When I arrived, my wife was visibly uncomfortable. She hadn't expected me to show up. The lawyer also seemed surprised, but he went ahead with the meeting. It was about a change in the marital property regime. My wife wanted to change it to complete separation of property. She said it was just a formality, that it would facilitate future probate issues. The lawyer explained the details technically, and I just listened. In the end, I said I needed to think about it, that it was a big decision. The lawyer agreed. My wife was tense, but she didn't insist. We left the office and she asked why I had gone. I said I thought it was important to be there. She didn't answer. She just remained silent the whole way home. That night I overheard her talking to her children on the phone. She was speaking softly, but not softly enough. She said I was starting to get suspicious, that they needed to speed things up, that perhaps it would be better to take more direct action. And that's when I understood. They weren't going to wait much longer. The next move would be the final one. I realized it early on, and now I was about to see it all unfold. When you wait long enough, people always reveal the whole plan. They can't help it, because the closer they think they are to their goal, the more they talk, the more they plan aloud, the more details they let slip. 2 weeks after the meeting with the lawyer, my daughter showed up at home. With a folder, she said she had spoken to a geriatrician, that he had suggested a complete evaluation of my cognitive health, just to make sure everything was okay. She said it with a worried look on her face, as if she really cared, but I already knew where that was going. A medical evaluation that could be used to declare me incapacitated, to justify legal guardianship, to legally take away my autonomy. I said I'd think about it. She insisted, said it was important, that the sooner the better. I kept saying I'd think about it. My son showed up the next day. He also had worry on his face. He said he'd noticed I'd been forgetting things, that I was repeating stories, that I was getting confused about dates. All lies. But he said it with such conviction that it seemed real. I just listened, and I said I hadn't noticed any of that. He insisted. He said it was normal, that it happened to everyone, that it wasn't anything serious, but that it would be good to have some tests done. My wife joined the conversation. She said she had noticed it too, that she was worried, that they only wanted what was best for me. It was a coordinated move. They had rehearsed it. They knew exactly what to say, how to create the narrative, how to push me in the direction they wanted. And I let them talk. I let them construct the whole story, because every word that came out of their mouths was further proof that this wasn't about care. It was about control. I agreed to take the tests. They were relieved. They scheduled everything for the following week, and I went. But before I went, I did one thing. I contacted my own doctor, a doctor who had been treating me for 15 years, who knew my health better than any new geriatrician, and I asked him to do a complete and independent evaluation. I took all the cognitive tests, memory, reasoning, orientation. I passed them all, with normal results for my age, and I asked him to document everything, with a signed report, with the date, with a stamp, because I knew they would try to manipulate the results of the other test, or they would choose a doctor who was willing to say what they wanted to hear. And I was right. The exam my family scheduled was at a clinic I'd never heard of, far from where I usually went, with a doctor no one recommended to me. When I arrived, my wife and children were already waiting. They came into the consultation room with me. I found that strange, but I didn't question it. The doctor asked basic questions. Some were even reasonable, but others were clearly targeted. Questions phrased in such a way that any answer could be interpreted as confusion, as a loss of capacity. I answered everything calmly, clearly. And I realized that the doctor was writing down things I hadn't said. He was creating a narrative that didn't correspond to reality. When we left, my wife asked me what I thought. I said I thought it was strange. She said it was normal, that this type of evaluation was always like that. 2 weeks later, I received the report, and there it was. A diagnosis of mild cognitive decline, with recommendations for close family monitoring and possible need for support with financial decisions. That was exactly what they needed. A medical document that could be used to justify anything. Guardianship, irrevocable power of attorney, even hospitalization. My children called a family meeting. They said we needed to talk about the report, about the next steps, about how to ensure my well-being. And it was at that meeting that they put everything on the table. My daughter spoke first. She said she had done a lot of research on care for people with cognitive decline, that she had visited some excellent places, specialized homes, with all the necessary facilities, and that she thought it would be good for me to consider that possibility. My son finished the sentence. He said they were willing to take care of everything, the properties, the accounts, the investments, that I didn't need to worry about anything, that I just had to sign a few documents and they guaranteed that everything would be done in the best way. My wife remained quiet. She just nodded in agreement, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I looked at the three of them, and for the first time in months I smiled, a small smile, but a genuine one, because I had already seen everything I needed to see. They had built the complete plan. They had left all the evidence. They had made all the mistakes, and now it was only a matter of time. You know that feeling when you wait so long for a moment that, when it finally arrives, you feel almost relieved? That's what I felt in that meeting, because they had finally shown all their cards. They had laid out the complete plan, and now I could act. But it wasn't time yet, because they hadn't yet taken the final step. They hadn't yet made the irreversible move. I said I needed to think, that these were important decisions, that I needed time. They insisted. They said the sooner the better, that it was for my safety. I stood my ground. I said I would give an answer in a week, and they accepted, because they believed I would give in, that I had no choice. That week, my wife tried to convince me every day. She talked about how nice it would be not to have to worry about paperwork, about bills, about decisions, that I deserved to rest, to enjoy myself. My children called constantly. They sent messages, always reinforcing the same story, always pushing in the same direction, and I let them, because the more they insisted, the more they exposed themselves. On the 5th day, I received an unexpected visit. It was the family lawyer, the same one from the previous meeting. He said my wife had asked him to come and talk to me, to explain some legal details. He brought the documents, a power of attorney with full powers, a will amendment, transfer of assets to a family trust. Everything was ready. He just needed my signature. He explained each document in that technical tone that lawyers use, as if it were all normal, as if it were just a formality. I listened to everything. I took the documents, I read them carefully, and I said I would sign them, but that I needed to do it in my own office. Calmly, he agreed. He left everything with me. And that's where they made their final mistake, because by leaving all those documents with me, they gave me access to everything, to all the hidden clauses, to all the details they didn't want me to look at closely. And when I read it carefully, I discovered things even worse than I imagined. The documents revealed everything. It wasn't just about stepping away from the decisions. It was about taking ownership of everything, legally, definitely. The trust they had prepared transferred all assets to the control of my wife and children, immediately. No need to wait for probate, no need to wait for anything. The power of attorney granted complete powers, including the power to have me committed, to sell any property, to close any account, to make any decision about my life. The new will changed everything I had planned. It reduced donations I had promised to charities. It cut people I wanted to include. It concentrated everything in their hands. And there was a clause at the end, a small clause written in technical language, which basically said that once those documents were signed, I could not revoke them. I could not change them. I could not go back on them. It was a perfect trap. And if I had signed without reading properly, I would have fallen into it. They thought I didn't understand. They thought I was too confused, too incapable, that I would sign anything they put in front of me. But I understood, perfectly. I made copies of all the documents, I photographed every page, and I kept everything in a safe place, along with all the other evidence I had collected over the past few months. After that, I did something they didn't expect. I sought out my own lawyer, one they didn't know, one I had consulted years ago and who knew exactly the kind of person I was. I showed him everything, all the documents, all the evidence, all the conversations I had recorded, all the fake medical reports, everything. He analyzed it carefully and confirmed what I already knew. It was a veiled attempt at interdiction, to take complete control of my assets through means that seemed legal, but were based on fraud, on manipulated reports, on documents that I had never truly authorized. And he told me that I had enough evidence to reverse everything, and more than that, to take legal action against those who had participated in it. But I still didn't want to do that, because I wanted them to take one more step, the final step, the one from which there would be no turning back. Have you ever seen a perfect plan fall apart? It's almost beautiful to watch, because the more perfect the plan seems, the greater the fall when it fails. On the last day of the week I had requested, I called the family together for a meeting. My wife, my children, everyone was there, anxious, confident, thinking I was going to sign everything. I placed the documents on the table, and I said that I had read everything, carefully, and that I understood exactly what was happening. The silence that filled the room was absolute. My wife tried to speak first. She said I was misinterpreting things, that it was all just to protect me. My children agreed. They said I was being too suspicious, that I was seeing malice where there was none. I let them talk, and when they finished, I picked up my phone and played a recording, one of the conversations they'd had, where they spoke openly about the plan, about making me look incapable, about taking control of everything. The color drained from their faces. I grabbed another document, the real medical report, the one I had done with my own doctor, which proved that I was in full cognitive capacity, that the whole diagnosis of decline was false. They tried to speak, they tried to explain themselves, but I raised my hand and they fell silent, because at that moment they understood. I had seen everything. From the beginning, I had let them go ahead. I had given them free rein. And now they were completely exposed. I said I wasn't going to sign anything, that all those documents were null and void, that the power of attorney my wife had used was invalid, that every action they had taken based on it would be reversed. And more than that I had consulted lawyers, and that I had options, legal options, which included suing for attempted fraud, for falsifying documents, for a series of crimes they didn't even imagine they had committed. My daughter started crying. My son tried to argue. My wife remained silent. And I just watched. Because that's exactly what I had been doing for months. Watching. There's something about consequences that most people forget. They don't appear dramatically. There's no background music, no explosions. They appear coldly, calculated, inevitable. In the days following the meeting, my family tried everything. They tried to apologize. They said they had been misadvised, that the lawyer had suggested all of that they only wanted what was best for me. I was listening, but I didn't answer. My wife tried an emotional approach. She talked about our years of marriage, about everything we've built together. She said she'd made a mistake, that she'd been influenced by the children, that she wanted to fix it. I remained silent. My children tried to appeal to the family. They said that family forgives, that family overcomes, that it couldn't end like that. And I just looked at them and said something they'll never forget. Family isn't about sharing blood. Family is about sharing respect. After that, I took the necessary legal steps. I revoked all powers of attorney, every single one. I contested every document that had been signed without my actual knowledge, every property transfer, every change in accounts, and I filed for a legal separation of assets from my wife, based on a breach of trust, based on an attempted misappropriation, with all the evidence that I had documented for months. The process was quick, because I had everything, every piece of evidence, every recording, every document. The judge didn't even need much time to decide. The separation has been approved. All changes made have been reversed. My assets have been protected. No family member has been ordered to interfere with my financial affairs without judicial authorization. My children tried to contest it. They said I was being manipulated, that maybe I really did have cognitive problems, that I had been influenced by unscrupulous lawyers. The judge ordered a new medical evaluation to be done by a court-appointed expert. I passed all the tests, with flying colors, and the expert confirmed that the previous report had been clearly manipulated, that it had no scientific basis, that it had been commissioned. This opened another case against the doctor who had made that false diagnosis, and against the lawyer who had prepared fraudulent documents. The consequences began to fall like dominoes. The family lawyer lost his license after an investigation by the ethics committee. It was proven that he had actively participated in an attempted fraud, creating documents knowing they were based on false information. The doctor was also investigated, and they discovered it wasn't the first time, that he had a history of questionable medical reports, always favoring families who wanted to have relatives with assets committed or legally incapacitated. He lost his medical license and also faced criminal charges. But the biggest consequences were for my own family. My wife had to return everything she had transferred. Every penny, every property, everything went back to my name, and she was left with no access to anything. The judge determined that she had acted in bad faith, with premeditation, and therefore she had no right to anything we had built together. She tried to argue. She said she had helped build it all, that she deserved a share. But the evidence showed that during the last 2 years, she had made systematic transfers. She had hidden money. She had lied about transactions. This negated any argument of good faith. My children also suffered consequences. The property that had been transferred to their names was reversed, and More than that. They were included in the lawsuit for participating in an attempted fraud. Because they had acted actively. They had coordinated. They had participated in meetings with lawyers and doctors, knowing that everything was based on lies. The judge did not order their imprisonment, but he ruled that they should pay compensation for moral damages, for attempted misappropriation, and he established that they were prohibited from having any contact with me without judicial authorization. They tried to contact me several times after that. They sent messages, they called, they showed up at my door, but I never responded because I had nothing to say. Everything that needed to be said had already been said. Everything that needed to be done had already been done. And for the first time in years, I felt peace. You might be wondering if I felt remorse. If at any point I thought about forgiving, about leaving everything behind, I thought about it. I'm not going to lie. I thought about it many times, especially in the first few weeks after it all ended, because these were people I had loved, people I had raised, people I had shared a life with. But every time I thought about forgiving, I remembered one thing. They hadn't betrayed me on impulse. It hadn't been a mistake. It hadn't been a moment of weakness. It had been planned, for months, maybe years, with meetings, with prepared documents, with bribed doctors, with rehearsed lies. They had watched me day after day, knowing exactly what they were doing, knowing they were deceiving me, and they had chosen to continue. It wasn't a mistake, it was a choice, and that difference matters, because I can forgive a mistake, I can understand a moment of weakness, but I cannot forgive a conscious choice to destroy myself. Some people told me I had been too harsh, that the family deserved a second chance, that I should have resolved this privately, without lawsuits, without publicity. But these people didn't understand one thing. If I had resolved it privately, nothing would have changed. They would have apologized, promised to change, and in a few months they would be trying again, in a different way, with a different plan, because the problem wasn't the plan. The problem was the character, and character doesn't change with talk, it changes with consequences. So yes, I was tough, I was ruthless, because I had to be, and I don't regret it. In the following months, my life changed completely. I moved house, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to start over in a new place. Without memories, without a past, I redid my will, this time with lawyers I chose, with independent witnesses, with everything documented so that no one could question it. I left most of my assets to charities, to causes I always wanted to support but never prioritized: education, medical research, support for abandoned elderly people. Yes, the irony was not lost on me. For my children, I left a symbolic amount, enough to show that they hadn't been forgotten, but not enough to warrant contesting it, and I left a letter explaining exactly why, because I wanted them to know. I wanted them to remember every time they looked at that will, to remember what they had done, and what they had lost because of it. I left nothing for my ex-wife, because she had already received what she deserved, which was exactly that, nothing. I made new friends, people my age who had gone through similar experiences, who understood what it was like to be betrayed by the person you trusted most. And I found a community I didn't know existed. I discovered that my story wasn't unique, that many men and women of my generation had gone through this. Children who wanted to expedite inheritances, spouses who wanted to secure theirs, families who saw people as property to be managed. And I realized that by fighting back, by not accepting it, by seeking justice, I had done more than defend myself. I had created a precedent. I had shown that it was possible to react, that it wasn't necessary to accept being a victim. Some people from my new community approached me. They asked for advice, they told me their stories, and I helped as much as I could, not as a lawyer, but as someone who had been there, who had seen it, who had survived. And that gave me a new purpose, a meaning I didn't have before. Today, when I look back, I don't see those months as something bad. I see them as a learning experience, a lesson about human nature, about greed, about family, and about myself. I learned that silence is not weakness, it's strategy, it's control, it's power. I learned that not every warning is a favor. Sometimes letting people make mistakes on their own is the only way for them to truly learn. I learned that realizing something early doesn't mean acting early. It means having time to plan better and act more effectively. And I learned that dignity is not negotiable, that respect cannot be begged for, that some battles must be fought to the end, not for revenge but for principle. My life is simpler now, lighter, without people who pretend, without relationships based on self-interest, without lies disguised as care. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm truly living. Not just surviving, not just pretending, living. If you're going through something similar right now, let me tell you something. You're not alone. And you're not wrong to be suspicious, to observe, to protect what's yours. Trust your instincts. If something doesn't make sense, it's because it really doesn't make sense, and you have the right to investigate, to question, to protect yourself. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty about it. Don't let anyone convince you that you're being paranoid, because sometimes paranoia is just heightened perception, and if the time comes to act, act intelligently, with evidence, with planning, not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of justice, out of dignity, out of self-respect. Because in the end, the only person who will carry your decisions for the rest of their life is you. So make it worthwhile. Look, if you've made it this far, it's because this story resonated with you in some way. And I want to ask you one last thing. If you enjoyed it, if it helped you in any way, leave a like below and subscribe to the channel. Because there are many other stories like this. Stories of people who chose dignity, who chose strategic silence, who chose to win without shouting. And I want you to be part of this community, this conversation, this space where we understand that strength isn't noise, it's control. So stay with me, and let's continue this journey together.